Hey, princess. Can you tell me which way is catering?
I like that. Do you want to do that?
Sure.
All right.
Well, I already did.
Well, but I'm laughing.
Oh, but I like when you're laughing. Hey, princess. Can you tell me which way is catering?
Hold on. Yes, I'll show you. Just give me a minute. I got to adjust my tiara.
Ooh, good one. But at first I have to get my tiara out of the box, the locked box.
Correct. Retinal scan, thumbprint, voice recognition. Which way is catering with Justine and Bruce?
Served up by Variety Attractions, celebrating 60 years of entertainment excellence.
That's awesome. Speaking of excellence, we have an excellent part 2 episode with Tony Conway.
Yeah, and we talk about Buddy Lee and how he actually got started in wrestling.
And then had the idea of, okay, we got this down. Let's try female and midget wrestling.
Right. Have you been a fan of wrestling? Are you like a wrestling fan?
When I was a kid, with the Crusher and Baron von Raschke and, the High Flyers and Jumpin' Jim Brunzell. Yeah, I know a couple.
Just a few. Well, I remember like in the early 90s, it was like Guy with the Coffin. What was his name?
The Undertaker.
Yes, The Undertaker.
Well, then there was probably Randy Macho Man Savage and Hulk Hogan. And
then there was a duo, and they were Dink and Donk, and they were like the, high five and traded.
Yeah, I lost you after you said clowns. Anyway, we talk about wrestling. We also, a good one is Chili with Willie.
Yep, and that started the first Farm Aid.
And that was a fabulous story about how that all came together and putting people on the bill at the last minute and didn't know who they were. And then were surprised when they came out on stage and belted it out.
Mm-hmm. I got my backstage pass ready. Do you?
Yes, I do. It's kind of folded and messed up, but I think you can see it. Do you have any good stories of Buddy Lee, the wrestler?
Yeah. Well, I wasn't around when he was wrestling.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I was born then, but I can tell you a little bit about it because I got into the wrestling business because of Buddy. But Buddy, when he was 18 years old, Buddy grew up in New York in the Bronx, and his mother and father were Italian. So he lived in an Italian neighborhood. Back in that time, you didn't have a lot of options. You you either became a manual labor worker somewhere, or you went to college, which he did not do. Or you get hooked up with the wrong people,
Mm-hmm.
So one day his father told him when he was like 17 years old or something, he said, "Buddy, you need to get out of this. You need to get out of here because you're hanging out with the wrong crowd, wrong group. These wise guys, you're going to end up being one. And if you don't get out of here, you're going to have some problems." And so he said, "Well, where would I go?" I mean, when he was there going to high school, he worked at a fruit stand, delivering fruit. And his dad said, "I don't know where you're going to go, but you need to leave. You need to get out of town, So he somehow decided he wanted to go to Boston, Massachusetts.
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't really know anybody there. But he goes there and he starts looking around for a job, and he runs into this guy. And at the time, I guess when he was 18, he was a very in shape, good looking, blonde hair guy, really a very good male specimen.
An Adonis.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
And so one of the people that he met when he was looking for a job said, you know, you ought to get into wrestling. And he goes, well, what do you mean? You mean like professional wrestling? He said, yeah, you should get into professional wrestling. So he said, well, do you know anybody in that business? And he goes, yeah, um, so and so, you know. And so they introduced him to this guy, and this guy says to Buddy, well, if you want to do it, I can send you to the guy that can teach you how to become a wrestler. They have like a wrestling school or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And so he went and he caught on real quick. And then he actually got a guy that was a wrestling promoter, manager that kind of took him under his wing, a guy named Jack Pfeffer. That was a well-known in the Northeast in the wrestling business, which actually Buddy ended up working for Vince McMahon Sr.
Okay.
Vince McMahon's
Yeah.
WWE father.
Mm.
And so he became a professional wrestler. And Buddy Lee is not his real name. Buddy's real name is Joseph Penhall. But he had to have a wrestling name. And so he was trying to figure out a name, and this Jack Pfeffer guy that was his manager, the way I remember Buddy telling me, I think said, let's go. We got to get you some new clothes. We got to go into town, into Manhattan. I'm going to get you a suit or something. And when they did, they went to this men's clothing store, and it's called Buddy Lee's men's store. Buddy Lee's men's store.
Mm-hmm.
And Buddy said, that's got a little neat little ring to it. And of course, the big wrestler at that time was Buddy Rogers.
Mm.
And so Buddy said, what about Buddy Lee? And Jack Pfeffer said, yeah, that'd be great. So that's how it became Buddy Lee. And then he decided that he wanted to, there was women wrestling was coming on strong. And back in those days, wrestling was kind of like the way promoters used to be in the United States, where each territory had its own promoters. There wasn't a Vince McMahon WWE that did the whole country. You know, if you went to Tennessee, there was a promoter that did all the Tennessee matches. If they went to Texas, they probably was 2 or 3 promoters that did Texas. And so those people would book the card. They would book who's going to wrestle who. You know, they get a headliner and then an undercard and an undercard and an undercard. But they always wanted a female wrestlers and midget wrestlers. So Buddy saw a big void in female wrestlers. And so he decided he'd become a manager and an agent of female wrestlers. And then he decided he had learned so much about promoting wrestling and how to promote. He wanted to try his hand at promoting some music. And so he started promoting R&B concerts on the East Coast, from that area, that Massachusetts, all the way down to South Carolina, and ultimately moved to South Carolina. Columbia, South Carolina is where he ended up moving to. And but he did Little Stevie Wonder and Diana Ross and the Supremes and Sam Cooke and all those kind of artists for a number of years, and did very well at it. And then one time somebody told him, you ought to try country. And he goes, I don't know much about country. And he said, well, book a country show and see what happens. You know how to promote. It's the same thing. So he booked them at the Columbia Township Auditorium. He booked a country show there, and it was a package show. I think he told me he paid $2,500 for it. And it was like 6 acts and 1 band. And he said they all pulled in about an hour before the show. He said they were all dressed, you know, in their suits, their nudie suits, and they were very polite and calm and nice, and went and did the show. The crowd, it sold out. and the crowd was crazy, and everybody made a lot of money. And he was like, my goodness, this was easier than
Mm-hmm.
promoting an R&B show. I might want to do some more of these. So he did. And one thing led to another. And then he booked some shows with Audrey Williams, which was Hank Williams' wife. After Hank Williams had died, she went out on tour. And then she took her son, Hank Williams Jr., who was probably 10 to 12 years old.
Mm-hmm.
She'd bring him out and he'd sing a couple of Hank's senior songs, and the crowd went nuts. So anyway, Buddy started booking that show in different cities, and it did very well. And so Audrey came to him one day and said, hey, if you want to move to Nashville, you could book all of our shows. We could open up an agency and you could book all of our shows. And so he thought about it and talked to Rita, and they picked up and moved to Nashville, Tennessee. And I think he told me he didn't really have but $1,500 to his name.
Mm.
And came to Nashville, and they started a little agency called the Aud Lee Agency. And that was to book Audrey Williams and Hank Jr.
Yeah.
And then that turned into Buddy Lee Attractions. When Audrey passed away, then Buddy bought her share of the company, and that became Buddy Lee Attractions.
Nice.
And then they brought on this little trapeze artist by the name of the Great Zucchini.
Yeah, because you and Buddy then met in Nashville, correct?
That's correct. That's a great story too. I had I'd gotten out of college, and I'm one of the few people that I've met that knew what I wanted to do. When I was in high school and college, I wanted to be in the music business. I didn't want to. I loved playing. I had a band. I was a drummer in my band, and we played. We did a lot of proms and fraternities and sorority shows and stuff. And I did that all the way through college, high school and college, and I loved it. But I knew that I wasn't. I'm this guy from Bardstown, Kentucky. I knew I wasn't a great drummer, and I knew I wasn't going to be a big star. But I knew in my gut that I wanted to be in the business part of it. I like the behind the scenes stuff. And I like the agency part, the talent agency, the management part, the production part. When I got out of college, I started going to agencies that had booked our band and asked them if they'd hire me as an agent. And they wouldn't, because they said, well, you don't have any experience. We're not going to, back then they wouldn't train you. We're not going to hire you because you don't have any experience. So I said, well, okay, thank you. And I decided to open up my own little agency. I'll show me. So I opened up an agency in Lexington, Kentucky with a friend of mine, and did that for a long time. And then one of the bands that I was booking then was a group called Peace and Quiet. And they were from Nashville, Tennessee. And they were by far the most amazing vocalist, harmony, guitar players, keyboard players, drum. I mean, they were just way, way, way better than anything I had ever seen live. And come to find out, they were session musicians here in Nashville. And they were also Crystal Gale's touring band. And so when she wasn't on tour, they would book out and do these little fraternities and sorority parties, and they liked doing that. Anyway, I became friends with them, and I said, if you were me, what would you do if you wanted to become a national agent? And they go, well, you're going to have to either move to New York, Los Angeles, or Nashville. And one of those three cities, if you want to be a national agent. I said, well, Nashville's only 3.5 hours away. I think that's maybe where I should go. And they said, well, come on down. If you need a place to stay, we have a band house, and
Fun.
you're welcome to stay there until you can find an apartment or whatever. And so that's what I did. I moved to Nashville. I didn't know a single person here. I moved into the band house. I lived with peace and quiet. And I walked the streets. I tried to meet as many people as I could. But again, nobody would hire me. So I did the same thing. I just opened up my own little one-room talent agency because I knew I could book these bands for high school proms and fraternities at colleges and stuff like that. So that's what I did. And it happened to be the building that I was in the same building that Buddy Lee Attractions was in. They had the top 2 floors of this building, and I was on the first floor. And so I was there probably a year. And one night about 8 o'clock, there was a knock on my door. I said, come in. And it was Buddy. I'd never met him, but of course I knew who he was. And Buddy was a very dapper, overpowering big man. He was always sharp dressed, a lot of beautiful jewelry and stuff. So anyway, I was kind of like, oh,
Hey.
Buddy Lee, and he goes, well, I'm Buddy Lee. And he said, when I leave at night, I always see your light on under the door, and I hear you on the phone. And I said, yes, sir. I work late because that's when I can get a hold of the club owners. Most of the club owners don't come in the afternoon. They come in about 6 o'clock at night, and then they stay till about midnight. And he said, that's right. He said, well, if you ever want a job, just walk down the hall, go up the elevator. I got a desk for you.
Wow.
Well, that was something that was my dream. That's something I'd always wanted. And here it was, he was offering me a job. And for some strange reason, I said, well, I appreciate it, Mr. Lee, but I'm happy doing what I'm doing. But thank you very much. And, if I ever change my mind, would it be okay if I give you a call? He said, sure, just give me a call. I said, okay, thank you. And it's very nice to meet you. So he left. So I went home, and my girlfriend at the time, who later became my wife, I said, you're never going to believe what happened. Buddy Lee offered me a job today. And she said, he did? Well, you took it, didn't you? And I said, no, I turned it down. And she said, well, Tony, that's what you've been wanting to do your whole life. Why would you do that? I said, I don't know. I got scared. I don't know.
Yeah.
She said, well, you better call him at 8 o'clock in the morning and tell him you want that job. And I said, okay. So I called him at 8 o'clock in the morning. And what I didn't realize is when you called he had it set up when you called the office, if he wasn't there, they would transfer the call to his home, but you didn't know that. And so I'd say, is Buddy Lee there? Hold on a minute. Let me check. And then she'd say, yeah, he'll be with you in just a minute. She put me on hold. And then he gets on the phone, and I said, Mr. Lee, it's Tony Conway. And I said, I thought about what I said last night, and I would really like to take that job. He said, well, I've been waiting on your call. So go down the hall, go up the stairs, and we got a desk for you. So I literally did that. I walked down the hall, went upstairs, and the receptionist, this beautiful lady, said, oh, Mr. Conway, we've been expecting you.
Oh, nice.
Oh my gosh. And they took me into this beautiful wood paneled office with a high back chair and a couch, and it was beautiful. I mean, I didn't have anything like that. And it was like, I tell people it was like the Wizard of Oz when they go into the castle, and all these people start coming and doing their manicures and their pedicures and working on them and stuff. Well, people started coming into my office just bringing me things like, well, here is your route book. and then they'd leave.
Mhm.
Then they come in and say, here's all the pictures of all the artists that we represent. Here's all the bios of all the artists that we represent. Mr. Lee said for you to take those with you and study them and read them and learn them. And then they brought in this huge Rolodex, which took 2 hands. Back then you had to turn it like this.
Yep.
It's about this tall.
Yeah.
And they said, Mr. Lee said, start at the A's and go all the way through the alphabet. And when you finish, go back and start with the A's again. Going through that list of people. And that's how I started. And that was in 1976.
That's wonderful. I
That
love
is.
that.
That's a
Yeah,
great story.
I love that.
November
So-
1st.
I mean, when he mentored you through the years, is there anything that like really, did he have like one-liners that he would always say, or things that he would like, now Tony, and he'd say his one-liners, or anything kind of goofy he'd try to like drill into your head?
Yeah. Anything you took away from it that you
Yeah, you
kind
know.
of, it's almost like Buddy Lee speak coming out of your mouth now.
Yeah.
A lot of people tell me that I have a lot of his characteristics on certain things. I catch myself sometimes, you know, he was a wonderful teacher, but he was also very powerful,
Mhm.
intense. You know, that's how he got your attention. And he told me at one time, he said, I do that on purpose. He said, I learned that in the wrestling business. He said, I can make people think something, and then I can back off and they will remember what I was just talking about, and
Mhm.
they won't forget it. He said, you know, so that was one of the things that he taught me. And I do that myself sometimes now with our staff, you know, and they'll go, you're just like Buddy Lee.
You mentioned working with Willie Nelson for so many years. Talk to us about the first Farm Aid.
First Farm Aid, we
Yeah.
were in the Illinois State Fair in Springfield, Illinois. And Willie played that every year for like, I don't know, kind of like the Oak Ridge Boys do for the Kentucky State Fair. I think they've played it 35 years in a row.
Mhm.
Wow.
But Willie had done the Illinois State Fair for probably 15 or 20 years in a row. Had become friends with Governor Jim Thompson, who would come to the show every year. And they started this tradition where Governor Thompson thought he made the best chili. You know, make chili. They called it Chili with Willie. And Willie said, I know I make the best chili. I make a Texas chili. And so they would both make their pot of chili and they'd bring it on the bus before the show and they'd taste it, you know.
Mhm.
Somebody was declared the winner.
Yeah.
And then they'd pass it around to everybody else. But so anyway, he said, is the governor going to be, he says, the governor going to be here tonight? And Buddy was with me on that show, or Buddy was traveling with Willie. I was producing the fair. And I said, yes, sir, he's coming. He's bringing his chili with Willie. He said, oh, great. He said, well, where are we going to meet at? And I said, well, we probably meet backstage like we always do. And he goes, well, why don't we move it to the bus? We'll move it to the bus. I want to talk to him about something. And so I said, okay, I'll go find out. So I go off the bus and I get a hold of a guy named Jim Skillback, who was with the governor, and said that Willie wants him to come on the bus with the chili and he wants to talk to him about something. So maybe he could come a little bit earlier, maybe, you know, an hour before the show. And he said, okay, no problem. So he does. And of course, I'm invited and Buddy's invited to come on the bus with all that. And he hadn't really said a word to either one of us. Willie hadn't. And so they start small talk. And Willie says, you know, I'm looking for a place to do a concert for America. That's what he said. And I need your help, Governor Thompson. do you think you could help me find a place to do a concert to raise money for the American farmers? I'm going to do a benefit, and I want to do a big benefit, kind of like Live Aid, which had been about a month prior.
Mhm.
and Governor Thompson said, "Well, of course we'll help you." Um, he said, "How big a place you want?" And Willie says, "I don't know, 100,000 seats."
Wow.
And he said, "Oh, well." He said, the only place that's got anywhere close to that would be that he said that I could help you with would be the University of Illinois in Champaign. Their football stadium is 80,000 seats. Willie said, "That'll work." He said, do you think you could get the state to let us have it for free?"
Oh,
And the governor goes, "Well, let's find out." And he picks up his phone, a brick cell phone back in
phone.
the,
Yeah.
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 and he calls, and he's talking to the chancellor of the university, and he's like, what is the Saturday that you don't have a football game? And Willie told him, he said, it's got to be in September.
Oh,
This was August the 12th or 15th while we were having this meeting.
so a month out.
Yeah. And so Governor Thompson says, okay. He hangs up the phone. He says, okay, well, we've got September 23rd. He said, but now I will tell you, Willie, they've never, ever done a concert in that stadium since it's been built back in the 40s. And so I guess they can do one, but he said, I'm just letting you know that they've never done a concert there before, but yes, you can have it, and we're not going to charge you. Well, that's all Willie needed to hear, because now he had a place, he had a date. And so he looked at Buddy and he said, now, Buddy, I need you to be the promoter. And Buddy's kind of like, okay. How many acts are we talking about, Willie? And Willie said, I don't know, a lot. He said, I want every kind of music there is. I want rock, blues, bluegrass, country, pop. I want every genre of music that there is. He said, I don't know, maybe 30 or 40 acts. And, and Buddy said, well, okay, we'll see what we can, it's going to be we're going to have a lot of work here to do real quick. And then Willie said, and I want to raise money to put this on. I don't want to have to spend any money. I want corporate sponsors. And he said, I want to get some other artists to be partners with me on this, so we can create a board to decide where the money's going to go.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is all in one conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And
Over chili.
over chili.
Chili with Willie.
And so I'm just sitting there with my mouth shut, and I'm just in awe. And Willie said, and so he said, Buddy, you're going to be the promoter. And he says, and Tony, you're going to handle all the talent. You need to be the one to do all the talent and coordinate all that. And I said, yes, sir. I'll do it. And he said, okay, well, we got a show to do. Let's get the show. Let's do the show. So we all get off the bus. He goes and does the show. And of course, Buddy leaves with him. So I'm sure they're going to have a long conversation. So we put that together. I mean, it was the most exhausting thing I've ever done in my life. Sometimes we worked 18-hour days. It was unbelievable. We took our whole staff. We had about 25 people working at our company at the time, but we borrowed them to do farm aid, and we told all of our artists what we were doing, and fortunately they all were okay with it. They understood, and nobody really had an issue with it. And we were able to raise about a couple $1 million in sponsorships. We got a lot of product donated that we needed to put the show on, like little things you don't think about, but like plywood to cover a football stadium floor. This was before they had geotech and all the stuff they have now. And you had to find a tarp to put over that plywood, a fireproof tarp. And it's complicated, but we got the plywood donated, which would have cost several $100,000. We got all the food, the catering donated. We got, I remember USA Today newspaper was our media partner. We had full front page stories every day about it. It's sold out. Buddy did a great job promoting it. It's sold out 80,000 tickets. And then Willie decided he wanted it to be a telethon halfway through this. And so we had to go find a network that would air a concert from 10 in the morning till 10 at night live on television, which fortunately we got TNN, the national network, to do, which was another big deal. And they, they paid $1 million
Wow.
for the rights to have the exclusive broadcast it, and that went to the Farm Aid Fund. But everything you can think of from, we had to put I remember we had to put like 60 telephone lines backstage for the press in the media tent for their computers and their phones and stuff. I mean, this became a national media event. And of course we had, everybody from John Denver to the Beach Boys to Alabama to Loretta Lynn to Van Halen to Bon Jovi to Waylon Jennings and Johnny Cash and Willie and George Jones and on and on and on. John Conley, who had a farm. We got a lot of people that we didn't realize that were artists that had grown up on farms. Willie grew up on a farm with his grandparents. They had a hog farm. I think that's probably what, in the back of his mind, what he was thinking about. But yeah, it was amazing. And we had the day of the show. Of course, one of my fondest memories was the night prior to the show, actually AM, the morning of the show, about 2 a.m. We had just finished painting the stage. And Bob Dylan had flown in. He was on the show with Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers as his band. And they wanted to do a sound check. Well, the only time we could do a sound check was then. We couldn't do it in the morning, and we couldn't do it prior because the stage was wet, painted, had been painted. So his sound check was 2 a.m. in the morning.
Wow.
And it was such a surreal feeling to be standing in the middle of an 80,000 seat stadium with 2 or 3 people. I remember Buddy, a promoter out of Chicago, Arnie Granite with Jam Productions, who we had hired to, we'd never done a stadium concert before, and he had done the Rolling Stones and he'd done a number of stadium shows. So he was invaluable in helping us put it all together. We're just standing out there in the middle of the stadium listening to Bob Dylan and Tom Petty run through a couple of songs, and it was like, wow, this is pretty amazing. And then there was the other moment where, and I'll quit after this on Farm Aid, but it just shows you what stress we were under, I guess. We had ended up with 65 artists on one stage in one day.
Wow.
That's nuts.
Of course, since I was dealing with the talent, I was getting pressure from managers and record labels and, very important people, powerful people that kept saying, you need to put so-and-so on the show. You need to put so-and-so on the show. Because everybody wanted to be on it once it got rolling. And Um, Frances Preston, who was the lady that ran BMI here in Nashville, who was probably the most powerful female in the city or in the industry in Nashville. Very well respected, very nice lady. Called me up and she said, I need you to put a guy on, this is after we're done. We're done.
Mhm.
We'd already lined up who's going on, when, what. I need you to put somebody on the show for me as a favor. And I said, Francis, I would, but we just don't have a spot. We don't have any time. I'm sorry. And she goes, well, it's real important that you put him on. That's,
Yeah, here we go.
um, well, I know, but I can't. I just don't have, I can't do it. And she said, well, his name is John Fogerty. You know who that is? Well, I wasn't thinking, okay, I'm frustrated, I'm tired, and I really wasn't thinking. And I said, yeah, but we can't put him on. We can't put him on. And I really didn't connect John Fogerty, okay?
Mhm.
Just a name went zoom,
Yep.
right over my head. And she said, well, think about it. Think about it, because he hasn't performed live in about 10 years. It's like, okay. So I told Buddy, I said, Fran, they want me to put this John Fogerty. He said, well, you can't, if you can't, you can't. Just stick to your guns, you can't screw up the show. I said, all right. So a couple of days go by and somebody fell out. I can't remember who it was, but somebody
Mhm.
couldn't get there, and they legitimately wanted to, but they just couldn't get there. And so I had a spot for one song, maybe two songs. And so I called Francis up and I said, okay, if he's still available and he still wants to do it, he can do two songs. And she said, oh, he'll be there.
Mhm.
And you won't regret it. And I said, well, okay. So that was that. And I forgot about it. And, several weeks go by and here we are, day of show. And I remember we had an issue with the Beach Boys were on stage and the stadium was, people were stomping their feet. And the whoever was in charge at the university comes running backstage and saying, you got to tell the Beach Boys to tell the audience to quit stomping their feet. He says, this pieces of little concrete are starting to fall. It was an old stadium,
Yeah.
and you could actually feel, you could feel it moving. And I said, oh, I don't think I can go out there while they're doing a show and tell them anything, but we will between the next act.
Mhm.
Well, the next act was John Fogerty. So I said, this is that crazy thing I went through. Well, he goes on and I walk off stage down the steps towards one of the buses and I hear the crowd just explode. The loudest noise I'd ever heard the whole day, from 80,000 people. And then he kicks into Bad Moon Rising. And I go, that's John Fogerty? Oh my, I started crying.
Oh.
Because I was like, oh my gosh, I know he hadn't performed a Creedence Clearwater Revival song since he left the band.
Mhm.
And, he left the band 10 years ago. And this is the first time he'd ever done it. And it was historic,
Mhm.
Mhm.
Still gets me choked up.
I love it.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Awesome.
Farm Aid. It's
Farm
still
Aid.
Farm Aid.
going.
Yeah, love it.
Still going. $200 million.
Wow. That's outstanding,
Fantastic.
Tony. Nice job.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I can't, Willie Nelson deserves all the credit. he's kept it going. It was his idea.
I was perusing your website, and you have a special projects tab.
Hmm.
So I was looking at that. Explain, because I like Bill Monroe, and I like that, like, Kentucky bluegrass. I love that. So what is, when your special projects tab, what is that all? What do you do for his
The
estate?
projects are, we represent, or my company represents estates of people that have passed, but were superstars in their field and that continue to need somebody to, negotiate on their behalf
Okay.
for lots of things. Bill Monroe's an iconic, figure because I was with him at the White House in Washington, D.C. when President Reagan gave him that Medal of Freedom. Him and Frank Sinatra were the only two people that day that got it. And I went with Mr. Monroe, but he said, "You're the only living American that created a style of music." That's pretty heavy.
Yeah, that is.
That's pretty heavy.
Mm-hmm.
Bill Monroe is the father of bluegrass. He's credited with coming up with the name bluegrass. That's the name of his band, Bluegrass Boys. So, and that style of banjo, fiddle, mandolin, stand-up bass, guitar, high tenor voices, it's very unique. And so, yeah, the bluegrass is a big genre of music to a lot of people around the world.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a lot of things that can be done with Mr. Monroe's music and his legacy. Time we
Yeah.
do this, I'll tell you the story about when I went with Bill Monroe to that White House lunch with Frank Sinatra. And we accidentally, didn't know it, neither one of us knew it, but we carried a loaded .357 pistol in a briefcase in the White House.
What?
Huh.
Yeah.
How did that slide through?
Well, it's a whole story and it's a whole show in itself. We have to
Oh
give
my
you an hour to tell that
goodness.
story.
Okay, that's another podcast.
That's like, we'll do like episode 2 with Tony, the one where we talk about the gun in the White House.
yeah, the 357.
Yeah. Well, hopefully later this year we can do that episode like in person over drinks.
That'd be great.
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't do these. I mean, I've done a couple of podcasts, but it's fun to do this one because, you're talking about directly about stuff that I've done and witnessed and been through and in my different careers.
Mhm.
I don't get to talk about the fair part of it very much,
Mhm.
but that was a big part of my life. It still is. Can I tell you one real quick story?
Sure.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, because this is a George Moffatt story, and I
Yeah.
forgot that I didn't tell it. But so this has to do with George and Alabama. So George went out. George Moffatt has always been, what would I call it? He had a certain sense for upcoming talent. He could tell there was a moment when something happened and he knew right then, if I don't get that act, I'm going to lose out on some stuff, but if I get them, I'm going to win big,
Mhm.
And so when Alabama broke wide open and was selling out everything, he went to Dale Morris, who was their manager at the time, and their agent, and cut a deal with them to book, I think, it was either 40 or 50 shows that summer.
Wow.
He said, "I'm going to guarantee you 50 shows. I'll tell you where you're going to be." And they said, "Okay." And they told him how much each show was going to be. And so, but the first one was in, I believe, York, Pennsylvania at the Interstate Fair there. And so it's about 15 minutes before the show. And George hadn't seen them before. I mean, he'd seen them, knew about him, but he really had never seen him do a show. And so he's standing backstage with Dale Morris. And of course, the band and Dale had flown in on a plane, and they were at the hotel. And then so the runner had gone to pick up the 3 guys and bring them to the show. So they get there, they pull in about 10 minutes before they go on. George and Dale are standing there talking, and Randy and Teddy and Jeff get out of the van and are standing backstage getting ready to go on. And George says, Dale, with his little cigar, he said, Dale, when are the boys going to get their costumes on? And Dale says, George, they had on blue jeans, tennis shoes, and T-shirts.
Yeah.
And Dale says, George, that is their costumes. And George says, oh, shit. The first time he'd ever seen an act that sold out a grandstand that was wearing blue jeans, tennis shoes, and a T-shirt. He expected him to wear a nudie suit or something. But
right.
What's great is that when everybody tells a story with George Moffatt in it, everybody's got their own little imitation of George.
Yeah, I used to do a really good one. I can't do it anymore because I need to be around him to pick up on little things here and there. But I used to do a pretty good one. I was like, if I said something to him on the phone, I'd usually talk to him a couple of times a week. And if I said, well, okay, George, well, we'll do that, or we won't do that. He always would go, yell. Instead of just saying okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. He's funny. He's a funny man, but he's a great guy. And I owe him a lot too, because he really helped me in the fair business. I was afraid, being an agent and a fair producer, that I would really upset the other fair producers and they wouldn't buy my acts, because I was taking business away from them. Mm-hmm. And so I thought about it long and hard, and I went to each one of them, by the way, and I said, look, I'm going to make you a deal. I'm not going to approach any fairs that you have under contract. I won't call them. I'm not going to talk to them. I'm not going to do anything to try to take them away from you. I'm not going to do it. And I'd ask you to do the same thing with me, And I did. I stuck to it. I was very loyal to all the fair producers, and we never really had any issues at all. I mean, they'd buy all my talent, and I produced my fairs. They'd produce their fairs, and I did that for 12 years, and it got to be so much work that I had to stop. And I think they were kind of glad, because they got another 10 or 15 fairs
or something. Yeah. But
yeah, he's a good guy. I know he's having a rough time at the moment, but I think about him all the time, and he's helped many, many, many artists, and many, many agents, and many managers in the business. God bless George Moffatt.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yes.
Hear, hear.
Hear, hear.
Well, thanks a lot, Tony, and have a great weekend.
You too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks again.
See ya. Thank you.
See ya.
Thanks for joining us backstage, and visit Justine and I at varietyattractions.com.
Get your backstage pass and subscribe wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.
Which Way Is Catering with Justine and Bruce, served up by Variety Attractions, celebrating 60 years of entertainment excellence.
Find out how you can take advantage of their expertise in consulting, talent buying, production, and marketing services for your next event at varietyattractions.com. Com.